Okay.
Welcome to Talking in the Chasm.
Welcome. Compassionate, controversial conversation between best friends. Holy man.
And atheist.
This shirt actually says atheist.
In what language?
In negative space. It's kind of hard to see. It's not one of those. It's very hard to see actually. But there's the A, T,
Oh,
H, E, I.
I see it.
T.
Sure enough.
So yeah. Let's.
Oh, coffee mug.
I'm Felix.
I'm Matthew, and this
Yeah.
is my coffee.
Okay, let's take a. What do we got about going on with your coffee?
I want an appeal. I was looking through my coffee mugs to figure out what I was going to bring for Tick tonight,
Yeah.
and I'm getting low.
Oh, well, it's time to start hitting those thrift stores.
Or people need to send me coffee mugs.
Oh, nice. Yeah.
That's the gig right there.
Then I'll have to know your address when they'll come and kill
Well,
you.
we'll put together a coffee mug PO box.
yeah. To send.
This is a
gifts.
pretty little one. I don't know if you can see it. It's got little plants, flowers, and leaves,
Oh,
and
it's lovely. It's bas relief.
it's okay. Here's a little coffee dynamics.
Yeah.
Narrow at the bottom, wide at the top, so it cools fast.
Like a teacup.
Yeah, and it's not great for coffee. I have some that are bulbs, and then they get narrow. Those
Okay.
work better.
Is tea supposed to cool down or something? Is that why
I don't
teacups are
know.
always like that?
I don't know. I'm not sure what. I used to have a teacup with a mustache guard.
Nice.
Have you seen those before?
No. Oh, yeah. It's got like a little flat
Yeah,
bit with the...
right.
Yeah, I have.
Super cool.
That's great. So that seems like something you could buy aftermarket. Like something
You'd
you could
think
clip
a little
in.
clip on.
Yeah.
That'd be nice.
So let's start working on it. Come on. How about it, science?
Right. Science.
Let's go.
We're gonna talk about science.
We are.
What are we gonna talk about?
All right, so I read this amazing book by Carl Sagan that I love. It affected me greatly. It's called The Demon Haunted World. Science as a Candle in the Darkness. And he talks a lot about religion and science. It's not really denigrating religion so much as it is just talking about evidence-based thought and sort of what the difference is, like what is faith. But he uses this example of a dragon in the garage, which I thought was pretty cool. It could be anything. You know, you've heard a million things. There's the teacup in space, right? There's a teacup that's spinning around the sun, like one of the planets. You can't prove that there isn't a teacup, but that doesn't necessarily mean that there is a teacup. So you're not... The idea is not to disprove something. You don't have to prove that something doesn't exist to not believe it. You know, like I don't believe that there is a teacup spinning around or teapot or whatever spinning around the sun. But anyway, the dragon thing is a similar type of deal, and it basically goes something like, you have a neighbor that says, "Hey, I have a dragon in my garage. Would you like to see it?" And you're like, "Sure, man, show me that."
Check out a dragon.
Yeah, so you go to his garage and he opens it up and it's just this big empty room, right? There's a ladder.
And he's like, "Careful, careful!"
He's like, "Whoa, easy!" And you go, "I don't see it. I don't see anything. I don't see the dragon." He's
I'm like,
"Oh,
"What do you
no,
mean?
no.
It's right there."
He's there. He's invisible." And you're like, "Oh, okay, he's invisible. Why don't we throw some powder on the ground and then we can see his footsteps?" And he's like, "Yeah, he's invisible, but he also floats slightly over the ground." You're like, "Oh, okay. How about if we'll spray paint in the air and then that'll cling to him?" And and it's like, "Oh, no. He's non-corporeal. He doesn't really have a body, but he's there." And you're like, "Okay." He's like, "How about we'll put thermometers around the room, and then when he breathes his fire, we can see that there's heat. That way we'll know that he's there." He's like, "No, his fire doesn't really give off any kind of heat." And so you kind of get to the point where you're like, okay, is there really a dragon? I mean, you believe there's a dragon in the garage, but there is no way of testing that. There is absolutely no possible way of testing to see whether that is real or not. So I either just say, "Oh, okay, sure, I believe you, there's a dragon in the garage," or there isn't, right? So religion is a faith. There is a dragon in the garage, and you have reasons why you think that, but you try to convince me that there's a dragon in the garage and I don't see it or feel it or taste it or hear it or anything, it's very difficult for me to believe. And when we were talking about like what is religion, if there's one person that believes that there's a dragon in the garage, he's crazy, right? And if he tells his family and his family believes it, then they're kind of kooky, right? And then he gets 10 of his friends to believe it, and 20 of his friends, and 30, and then they get a church and they start, raking in money, and then they're a cult, And then there's the dragon cult, and then there's 100, and then they spread, and there's 1,000 and 10,000, and then it goes around, and pretty soon it's a religion. Right? And then pretty soon you get generations and generations of people talking about, oh, my grandfather saw the dragon in the garage, my grandfather pet the dragon in the garage, the dragon, cooked the steak that they served at the ceremony, you know what I mean? And then we're going to get all this lore around it. So his thinking and sort of my whole idea of my own existence and everything is that I am an evidence-based person. I need some sort of testable evidence before I just believe things. I don't believe things because they feel right. And we've mentioned a little bit about this before, where you're saying, well, then do you believe in love? Do you
what's the difference?
And those can all be broken down into lots of things, but what's the difference between what?
Well, my first two questions about the dragon in the garage would be, one, most of the things that are common in your and my experience would have been dragons if you just went a little bit back in time. Germs would have been dragons before microscopes.
Yeah, I can't remember who it was. That's some scientist, but he said any, what was the science fiction writer? Asimov or something. Any technology sufficiently advanced is indistinguishable from magic.
Right. Because I think when you describe the dragon, I'm like, that's the internet. That's Wi-Fi. Like, for all I know, there's fairies that carry little images that are invisible in the air.
Right.
I mean, that's a better explanation than what I could tell you if I tried to actually figure out how Wi-Fi works.
Right.
But somebody can.
But
I get that.
You're a smart guy, and you could certainly be taught how Wi-Fi works.
Right. But
and
the point remains, though, that if you tried to explain Wi-Fi to somebody 50 years ago, they'd think you're a nut job. You just... Or germs to somebody 100 years ago, 200 years ago. All of those things because they weren't perceptible.
Right, except that germs is something that can be demonstrated. Like.
But they couldn't have then.
You can say, oh, we're going to put we're going to take a piece of meat and we're going to put it in a glass with a cork bottle, and then we're going to put another one outside, and the one outside is going to be covered in stuff and it's going to rot, and the other one isn't. And it's like, well, why is that? Because there's little teeny tiny creatures.
So the assumption is that we can't experimentally explore the idea of God, which I would beg to differ. I think that there are a lot of attempts to look at reasons for, like, let's just say a creator instead of a religion in particular. Let's say creation, like that there's some initial there's some intelligence behind reality, some initial cause.
Right. So there's a design.
So things like irreducible complexity, which are mathematic attempts to say it's much more mathematically likely that this comes from something than is random. Those kinds of things are attempts to give some kind of definition to the dragon, to say, no, there is something here. We can spray some spray paint in the air and see it stick to some things. So I think those things are a matter of how you want, like, you show up to irreducible complexity with your biases in place. And if your bias is there can't be a creator, then we'll have to figure out some other way for that to make sense. If your bias predisposes you to the idea that there can be a creator, then irreducible complexity is obvious statistical evidence that this all had to come from somewhere.
Well, except that I didn't have that bias. In fact, I grew up in a religious household.
Sure.
So I
But you look at the evidence of irreducible complexity from the perspective of not believing God.
Well, right, but as I've said before with science, is that science doesn't claim that there is no God. Science says that there's no evidence for God. Now, science may eventually come up with the notion that there is a God and be able to prove it, and then go, oh my gosh, there's a God, and then science would be like, okay, yeah, there's a God. It's not to say.
But that wouldn't change your life anyhow.
No.
So what we're not talking about is there something that we don't know? We're talking about, is there a way to know what we don't know, or some way to organize your life around it?
Right. I mean, it's interesting because when we first started talking about this, atheism has not really defined who I am. I mean, I wasn't an outspoken atheist. In fact, I never talked about it to anyone because people equate it with evil or something, like, you're Satan or something if you say you're an atheist.
Ironic.
So I just never talk about it. It's sort of like, coming out, it's sort of like, sometimes it's just easier not to talk about.
I hate to break
something.
it to you. It probably wasn't hard for people to figure out.
Yeah. Look at that godless heathen. But, and the more that I read about atheism and the more that I read about religion, and certainly these talks have started me on a path of books. I've got the God Delusion next to the Holy
All I see
Bible.
is Calvin and Hobbes.
Got Calvin and Hobbes, 3 volumes. Well, my priorities are in order. Don't get me wrong. Anyway, and the more that I sort of think about this, the more it matters to me. Like the more kind of outspoken that I become. And
so I'm doing more harm than good at all of our conversations.
You sure are. But so my thing is like, okay, it's not so much about let's decide whether there's a God or there isn't a God. Let's prove that there's a God, because we cannot prove that there is a God. God could prove that he exists, but he chooses not to. If in fact he's an intelligent being, he chooses not to for whatever reason that's beyond us. Okay, that's not dangerous. Right? What's dangerous is this organizing into religions and saying, we believe in this and you don't, therefore we're going to kill you. That's the problem to me. This organized religion around the stories that we tell each other. Okay? It's like, you have a dragon in the garage, okay, that's fine. And then somebody else says, oh yeah, well, I have a unicorn in my attic who says that there is no such thing as a dragon in the garage, and then now that you've got two opposing factions,
the unicorn says stab all the dragon people.
This is, So
well, I agree with you. I'm against that.
I'm
religiously against that.
Yeah, but this, this, if you think about like any religion, like let's talk about Scientology. Do you know about Scientology?
Not much.
It's
crazy.
It's crazy, right? It's like a bunch of humans were on another planet, and they went to this Earth planet, and they dropped them all in the volcanoes, and all of the humans died in this volcano, and they became these things called thetans, and then they go into your body when
that
you're
sounds
born.
Like something a science fiction writer would write.
Right? The science fiction writer who also said the easiest way to make a lot of money is to invent a religion. So anyway, you think about that, and you're like, that's insane.
Right.
But then you tell me that there's some dude that walks on water and makes, and raises creatures from the dead and makes people walk, and I'm just like, dude, that's crazy. I mean, that's just insane. Why? It doesn't make any sense. And let's not even, we talked a little bit about this last time, but let's not even talk about the Old Testament God, where there's actually behavior that is reprehensible and horrific. But so you're crazy is just how many people believe it with you, and part of me was like, well, for some reason I think Scientology is ridiculous and I laugh at them, but there's something about Hasidic Jews that I find beautiful and somehow cool. I mean, why is that? They're both they're the same, and that's what I'm telling myself now. There's no difference between the Pope and a Hare Krishna. They believe what they believe, and they believe it fervently. And it's a fiction that I don't believe, and it differs. It's not the same fiction.
Well, to your point, to your credit, did you see what's happening in Iran right now with the coronavirus? Did you see this?
No, what's happening?
Well, it looks like there's a lot of obfuscation of the real facts on the ground, which is not surprising. But the Minister of Health gave a press conference a couple days ago, and during the press conference where he said that quarantine doesn't work, that's all the way back from World War I, and we know better now, he's wiping his brow and looks miserable. a few hours later, after his press conference, he's confirmed to have coronavirus. And I listened to a pundit talking about Iranian culture, and apparently, according to this pundit, Islam predisposes people to a kind of determinism. So I'm not going to die unless Allah chooses for me to die. So why should I quarantine myself, or why should I take precautions? Or one wonders why you shouldn't walk in front of a bus or shoot yourself with a gun. But that religious determinism is having real dangerous effects on the ground when it comes to something like this.
Yeah, that's what I mean. That's what when I say religion starts to scare me. I can't remember the exact quote, but it was something about if you can get somebody to believe the absurd, you can get them to commit the atrocious.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm just thinking, what would it take for me to convince you to fly an airplane into a building and kill thousands of people? What would that take? You would never do that. There's nothing I could do. There's no amount of money. You couldn't spend it. The only way I could do it is to say, after you die, you will be given riches beyond compare. Your name will live on earth as a whatever. It's a religious thing. I have to believe in this insanity, in my opinion, in order to do that, because people just don't do that to each other. We don't. And we don't shoot each other, just like that book we read. We don't kill each other until we form an army and say, those people do not believe what we believe.
They're not like us.
Or they're on a piece of land that our God said is ours, and let's get them.
So, quick rabbit trail. I do want to address that, but what do you think is more dangerous, governments or religions?
Religions.
Do you?
Yeah, because...
Well, every war's been by a government.
Well, okay. I mean, are we talking about them being inextricable? I mean, there's supposed to be a separation of church and state. That's not ever happened in our lifetime. It's never happened.
A modern idea, anyhow.
Yeah, but religion, I think to say, we want this land, or we need this money for this, or we need this territory, or whatever it is very different than saying we've been ordained by God that is our right, and we will absolutely kill for it in His name.
Well, it's funny
it's just
how
very
those things
different
go
because
together.
It's very different because that's easieasier to do. I don't think a government can tell somebody fly a plane into a building. I just don't see how
they
that
do.
would happen.
They send young people to check out trench warfare in the first war.
Yeah.
Walk into that field of guns.
Check out trench warfare. They're shooting over each other's heads.
Yeah.
They don't want to kill each other. These guys got into a plane and flew it into a building. I mean, that is a very different thing to me. It's a very different thing.
What about the kamikaze pilots?
Well, I think that's a religious thing. That was religion. That
Were
wasn't
they all
government.
Shinto pilots?
I don't know, but it was a very sacred, holy ceremony that they actually couldn't. They had way more volunteers than they had the planes. I mean, people were falling over themselves to be heroes in the afterlife.
So let me address the premise a little bit. I think that it works on a certain level. I think that there are ways that people are trying to grasp at reasons to believe, and they're interpretive. You see it or you don't. It's not I don't think it's a black or white thing. Like those there's a lot of very, very smart people who for scientific reasons attribute some kind of creation cause to where we are and what we are.
Right.
So I don't think it's entirely appropriate, but in its day-to-day application, whether you're talking to a Christian Scientist or a Muslim or your average Christian, the garage analogy works to a certain degree. Where I think it has some problems is that faith is a pretty common part of life. Like, I'll get on I'll get on asphalt and drive 70 miles an hour with somebody facing me at 70 miles an hour and separate each other by 10 feet and paint. And we all believe that it's going to work out. I have faith in someone I don't know driving at me at 70 miles an hour with a potential 150 mile an hour collision.
I'm not sure I would call that faith.
Is it not?
Well, I mean, we've all agreed that there needs to be certain rules. We've all agreed that you have to have a certain set of skills. We all agree that you have to have a license and all that other stuff. But that guy could be drunk and smash into me. I totally believe that. You know what I mean? So I don't actually have faith that I'm not. I drive like everybody's trying to kill me.
But you do drive.
I do drive, yeah.
And take another example. Have you ever been to Australia?
Mm-mm.
I've never been to Australia. I've looked at, I don't know, hundreds, dozens, thousands of maps in my life and globes, and I assume that where it shows me Australia is, that Australia is. Now, here's what I could do. I could test that theory, and I could follow that map and see if, lo and behold, I hit a place called Australia. And I think that the problem with the dragon analysis is that it's not to prove a thing, it's to prove a way, and to prove a philosophy, and to prove a life. And so, like the map to Australia, if I, for instance, look at what Jesus says, and he says, if any man thirst, let him come unto me, and out of his belly shall flow rivers of living water. If any man come to me, all you who are burdened and heavy laden, and take my yoke upon you, and learn of me, for I am meek and lowly of heart, and you shall find rest unto your souls. That's the description of a dragon, or Australia. And if you do that, if you go to Jesus' example and his life and his teaching, and you employ it into your life, and you find rest to your soul, I'm saying that that's a correlation. That just like I can follow a map to get to Australia, I can follow Jesus' teachings to get to peace, and that is a corroboration of his teaching and religion.
I think that teaching somebody to love somebody else is not religion, and I mean, Aesop's fables do the same thing. I've said this before. I think Jesus' teachings are awesome. I mean, awesome. And I probably live a more Christ-like life than most Christians in the world. Probably. Just in my
statistically,
relationship,
at least in America.
So,
I'm sad to say that.
But where religion, this sort of blind, I guess it's blind faith is the problem. But when somebody teaches somebody else homosexuality is an abomination, go out and hurt people, they do, in the name of God, because this book says, or can be interpreted to say, pretty much whatever you want. And one of those things is homosexuality is sin and needs to be punished. And, some idiot Falwell or someone said, oh, yeah, that's the planes smashing into the towers of 9/11 is just punishment. God, retribution for homosexual, or something like that.
That guy said it about Katrina and everything that happens. He says that about.
But he's a leader. He's a leader, a teacher. People follow him, and he uses the same book that you use.
A lot of people do, but I really think it's important that we consider teachers by their source. If you say you're a Christian, then you're obligated to follow Jesus' teachings. If you say you're a Muslim, then you're obligated to, what you're saying is, I'm following Muhammad's teachings. If you say you're a Buddhist, you're saying, else why call yourself that? Else why not say like you do, say, I appreciate the teachings of Buddha, I appreciate the teachings of Jesus. But if you're going to call yourself a Buddhist or a Christian or a Muslim, then you're claiming to be an adherent of those teachings. And that's where so someone can say, Hitler's an adherent of eugenics, and to him that meant purging the Jews. Hitler's an adherent of a lot of philosophies, and to him those become atrocious things. Mao is an adherent of things and are atrocious, and Stalin is. horrible people will use whatever's expedient to prove their case. I think it's a different question of whether or not those teachings themselves lead to that conclusion, or if people are just justifying themselves by whatever they want to. Like that guy that went wherever in was it Finland or Norway, went onto that island with all those kids at a camp and was shooting people, said he was reclaiming Christian Europe. Like, that's just, that really is insane. So you can't blame Jesus for some dude going on an island and shooting a bunch of kids and saying he's reclaiming Christian Europe. That's not on Jesus.
Well, I'm not blaming Jesus for anything.
But it's not at all consistent with Christian teaching.
Right, except that in the Bible, I can underline passages that very clearly say, it's okay to beat your woman. It's okay, that slavery is the way of the land, and that homosexuality is an abomination, or some such.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So I can use that book in any way I want. I mean, you can use it to teach love and forgiveness and humility, or you can use it to have people fly buildings into. So it's just a lot of power. It's a lot of power that's unsubstantiated, and my problem is that with these stories that we tell, we're not just saying that they're stories. They're not Aesop's fables that we can learn from. They are an actual creature, an actual person. This person died on the cross, and and so I'm going to carry a torture device around my neck everywhere I go to remind. What is going on? It's just, it has, you like Muslims. The teachings of Muhammad are awesome. The teachings of Buddha are awesome. The teachings of Christ are awesome, and yet people twist it and say, "Oh yeah, it's the Muslims that are the terrorists." The 0.00001%. I mean, probably the same amount that bomb abortion clinics, the Christians. I mean, it's that organization to say that. To me, religion is just another way of separating ourselves from each other.
Do you we talked last time about that about Paul being responsible for the idea of the individual in the West, at least in large part. Do you recognize how much your like culture and sensibilities and thought patterns and your whole like worldview has been shaped by Christian civilization? Like the fact that there's a scientific method is directly attributed to medieval people in the medieval era and in the Renaissance, assuming that if
and
there was
the Greek philosophers before
the scientific
that.
method doesn't exist among the Greek philosophers. Philosophy does, and mathematics do, but the scientific method does not.
So isolating a variable is Christian somehow? I'm not
the premise of the Enlightenment which led to the scientific method, was that if there is a creator, then things are created in order. And if there's an order, then there must be laws to them. And if there are laws to them, then they must be testable. Like there's a lot of good literature on the scientific method being derived from Christian thought.
Okay, well, so that's great. That doesn't necessarily mean that number one is true. If number 2 and 3 and 4, turn out to work, you know what I mean? It's like saying, oh, okay, there's a God. God makes things in order. Therefore, there must be an order. So let's figure out how atoms work. Atoms are orderly. That one does not necessarily mean that it comes from the other. Now, because atoms are orderly and we can understand how matter works, doesn't mean that there's a God.
Okay, granted, but what I'm saying is that if all we look at is, if all we put under the tally sum of religion is the Crusades, and we neglect,
I don't want to do that. Don't get me wrong. I'm not just saying religion's awful and everything bad is. I'm not saying that at all. I mean, I go to I used to live in Paris. Every time I look at Notre Dame, I catch my breath.
Sure.
I mean, obviously there's things about religion that are
Right.
just awe-inspiring in the extreme.
Right.
It's amazing. I'm not suggesting that it's only a negative thing. However, I would suggest that even without religion, we would have come up with a scientific method, because it's just logical. It makes sense, and it would.
Well, it is, but people aren't.
Whether or not that would have been Christians or Muslims or Buddhists or the dragon believers. I mean, it doesn't matter. We're figuring it out as we go along, and my honest belief is that we needed religion for a very long time to get us through a very important era in the history of humanity, but that we're shedding it now. That we don't need it anymore.
This is a fascinating premise to me, because I don't believe that premise.
Yeah, well, I hope not.
Well, I don't believe that we're shedding it. I think that my own hopeful look into the future is that in a secularized, post-Christian Western world, Christianity is going to recede back into the caves where it belongs, back into the underground, back into the not the handlers of power and influence and weapons, that Christianity is going to become a subculture again. I'm hopeful. I think this post-Christian America is the best thing. Like, I would love if American presidential candidates were not saying, "God bless America." That would be the greatest win for the true Church of Jesus that there could be. But
and for the atheists,
we have a common purpose there.
Yeah, get that off our money, man.
When our people have excelled, have done well at being representatives of their God and lovers of their neighbors, and influencing people for eternal righteous purposes, it's been when we're a subculture, when there's no other reason to listen to us than our compelling lives.
Well, that seems like there's a lot of constraints in order for it to work. Like, if it's truth, it should just work all the time. You know what I mean?
How do you mean?
Well, you're saying that it's not working because it's this enormous thing that's all about power.
Yeah, I'm saying that the premise of Christianity is that, so it's kind of there's a lot to it, but the way that Jesus teaches his people to live is antithetical to the way that you run the world. And when you mix those two things together, you distort. You have to immutably distort one or the other. They're mutually exclusive concepts. So power and coercion is mutually exclusive with Christian teaching. You cannot do that. So if you want to run a country, you have to use coercion. If you want to run a church, you can never use coercion. The two things can't coexist.
I mean, we've talked a little bit about this in the economic materialism thing too, but how big a group of people can you have?
Tons.
How big a group of people can you have and have there not be? You have to have.
Well, I think at one point you're going to have the whole world.
You have to have rules. You have to have a government.
I'm not talking about absolute anarchy. I'm talking about Christo-anarchy. No, I'm talking about Christo-anarchy. I'm talking about community. I have lots of rules. My community has lots of rules. Yeah. Rules are not a problem.
Right, yeah.
The fact that people should choose those rules for themselves rather than be forced to do them, that's the difference between my people and government and systems of the world. Because if you don't do what America says, they say, if you don't pay your taxes, we'll beat down your door, we'll take your stuff, we'll throw you in a can, we'll kill you. That's how America and China and Russia and Egypt and everywhere that men have ever run operates. Jesus says, I've got lots of rules. You want to follow them? If you do, your life will go this way. If you don't, okay, don't. And that's the difference. The president will never act that way. And so when presidents manipulate and use that power and say, God bless America, they're bastardizing the God that I serve.
They're also using that because that's the quickest way to get people to follow you. To say, God told me this. Right. God said that. Because when I say that, that means no question. I don't have to think about it anymore.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not using my rational brain. I believe in God. God is great. God is good. He's the all-powerful thing. He said, do this. Great. He didn't say that to me. He said that to an instrument that talks to me, because he never says it to me. My priest tells me what he says, or whatever. Some people he says it to, or feel that way. But let me ask you this: so if I say that humans came from another planet and they came here on a spaceship that looked like a DC-9 airplane, and they dropped them all in a volcano, and they turned into thetans, and our life is about getting rid of the thetans and going our past experiences. We can hold these cans. That's insane to you, right? It sounds crazy. And what about there's an angel that buried these golden tablets that God was supposed to have more commandments, and that they're on these golden tablets, and the angel whispered into my ear, and my wife wrote it down, and then turns out that got lost, and so he found some other golden tablets, and that sounds insane, right? But
Jesus walked on water.
Handed Moses the Ten Commandments. Oh no, that happened. Okay, that's true. But all the other stuff is crazy, which is sort of exactly what the Hindi think about Jesus, and as Muhammad thinks, that Jesus was just some guy. So
how do I differentiate?
Well, what do you think about that? I mean, when you look at a Hare Krishna somebody, or a Scientologist, Scientologist, you see Tom Cruise jumping around, do you just go, wow, that guy has completely lost touch? And do you not ever think about the fact that that's how Christianity was in the very beginning too? The people like, oh yeah, you're telling me Jesus rose from the dead? Okay, yeah, whatever.
For sure, people did that. I mean, it's a hard sell. Like, I think often of the Apostle Paul's life and ministry. He was like...
I'm just looking for the rabbit. I'm not listening to your conversation. I just sometimes I look for the rabbit.
We have a rabbit, and we have people that we look after.
Anyhow, when the Apostle Paul was traveling across Asia Minor, and he's telling people in the Greco world, hey, this people that everybody hates, the Jews, well, one of them, who was nobody and was like just a lowly carpenter, didn't have any money, any power, anything. He did crazy stuff and died and rose again. And if you believe that, it'll change your life. Like, that's insane. And
agreed.
And there's no Christian civilization, there's no Bible, there's no cathedrals, there's no Notre Dame, there's no nothing. And all of it comes out of that. All of the impact of Western civilization has its roots in a crazy man walking across Asia Minor telling them to believe in a Jewish carpenter that rose from the dead. And that's a little more to me than Thetans or Joseph Smith's tablets. So there's antecedents from the ideas that are huge and important. Like, we all literally stopped and started our calendars over it. Like, that's not insignificant.
Well, the Church of Latter-day Saints would feel differently about what you say about the golden tablets,
sure,
and the talking hat and all that stuff. I mean,
they would. When they create a civilization and a scientific method and individual rights, all from their philosophies, then we'll give them a fair shake at the table.
Yeah, it sounds like you win because you're bigger and you've been around longer. I mean, who's to say what's gonna be the end all? I mean, Christianity had a huge number of people believing it through torture and coercion, many of them, but not all of them. But certainly, I mean, the Americas and all that stuff, we had no reason to believe in Jesus until they came and freaking tortured it out of us. I mean, it's just, I just don't really see how the story of the Thetans, how you can see that as crazy and not feel that it's how you can feel that it is so different from your story, the one that you believe.
Maybe it isn't for people that believe it. I don't know what the internal experience and dynamics of someone who's following Joseph Smith or somebody who's following Muhammad is like. I presume it's significant. There's 1 billion Muslims, so I'm not calling it chump change. Well, I think what you're asking is, why is my bias disposed towards Christianity and not some other form of mythology?
Yeah, why are you right,
Right.
and Muhammad's wrong?
Right.
Because they feel the same way.
Right. And what I would say about that is highly subjective and highly personal. What happened to me was that I heard stories about the Christian narrative my whole life and didn't make any effect on me. In fact, was fairly open to whatever ideas, mostly nationalism. That's really what my religion was by the time I was in my 20s. When I reached a place in my life when I was like, what is Christianity? Here's what I said to myself. I believe Christianity, but it has done absolutely nothing in my life. I was really I was dealing probably for the first time consciously with existentialism, like, who am I, what am I? I didn't have that as a teenager in high school so much. My identity was fairly fixed, although tumultuous, but it was fairly fixed. When I got married is when I had what I would call an existential crisis. And during that phase, I was trying to transition out of street life. And what am I going to be? If I'm not going to be a skinhead, that's a dead-end street. So if I'm not going to do that, what am I going to be? And when I began to ask myself questions about what is and what am I had traditionally rooted my identity in American Christian, evangelical. And when I examined those claims, what I said is that it hasn't made any difference. For all the difference that me learning the teachings of Jesus my whole life growing up, for all the difference it's made in outcome, I might as well have been a Buddhist, except for I would have been a much better person if I had been a Buddhist. So what good is the claims of Jesus? And what I came to was, I said, there's two main possibilities. Either Christianity is a farce. It was just a ruse to make empire or money, or to set up somebody's weird notions, or some other permutation of that. Or Christianity has to be, if there's something true to the idea that Jesus rose from the dead, and there's something to do with before reality and after death that Christianity has to do with, then there has to be some way that that's personal, some way that it's attainable, some way that it's experiential and knowable. And I began to say to God, in sincerity, if there's anything to this, Christianity has to be about someone instead of something. And at that time in my life, I began to experience God in metaphysic ways, through prayer, through meditation, through, auditory hallucination. I don't know what all those things were, but I began to experience God in my life. And it reformed my nature. It made me somebody new. The violent, angry, dangerous person that I was went away. And it wasn't self-help. It wasn't self-actualization in the sense that I was disciplining myself or learning to think differently.
Right.
I hated people, and then I loved them. I was angry and broken, and then I worked. And I loved people, and I wanted to have a family. And the things that I used to hate, I began to love, and the things that I used to love, I began to hate. I didn't want to be drunk anymore. I didn't want to smoke weed anymore. I didn't want to be crazy anymore. I didn't want to hurt people anymore. I just wanted an entirely different ethos. And I didn't attribute that to self. because of that experience, I placed confidence in that word faith that we throw around. It's a Greek word. It's the Greek word pistis or pistevo. And that word in the classic usage is much bigger than the English word faith. Like if you and I were to buy a fishing boat together I'm sorry, I'm using the wrong example. There's an old work that a nobleman is he's writing a letter telling people to not break their treaty with him. And he says to have pistis in our agreement, have confidence in it, have trust in it. We trust each other. We're working together. That word pistis means like the painted line on the freeway, something that you order your life around and believe in. And that's how I began to interact with the teachings of Jesus and the person of Jesus. And so all of that internal subjective experience is why I look at the dragon in a different way. Not just because it's a dragon, but because it's a dragon that's changed me into something else. And that change is the evidence of the dragon.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I can't remember the day that I realized that I didn't believe any of this. But it certainly wasn't a negative experience. I mean, it's really like I just I just feel truer when I can only say yes to things that are measurable. You know, if I only can really believe in something that is provable, that's measurable. And again, you know, I'm in love as well. You know,
I don't believe you. Like I think either you don't really believe that, or there's something missing in the analysis, because you're such an aesthetic person. Like where do your ideas and your drawings and your concepts come from?
Well, this is the thing. It's like, you know, it's one of the things that Dawkins talks about is, you know, people are like, oh, you know, if without God we wouldn't have the Sistine Chapel, you know. And it's like, or Notre Dame. It's like, do you not think that Michelangelo was just a genius? And if you said, we need a ceiling that is going to commemorate the atom, okay? Make something that talks about evolution. We want something about dinosaur bones. Whatever it is, it would be awesome. I feel it. I just think that it would be awesome. And there's something about... you know, where does the art come from? Where does the music come from? I don't know. But like, you know, you look at a flower and you go, my gosh, that is God. I mean, there it is, right there. And I look at a flower and I go, man, that is so freaking cool. How the light bounces off only the purple and everything else is absorbed into it. And it's so crazy how the eye works. And this is just so wild. And I see the science around it and I'm just like, that is so cool. Just as cool. Just as awesome. You know, I look into the night sky with the Milky Way going across. I'm just like, man, I'm tiny, and I love that feeling. But it doesn't make me feel like there's an order to this. I think it's just amazing and so cool, and it's crazy how life happened and how we evolved into the way that we are and how we're still going. But I don't think that there's a person or a creature or being that made us and then said, now you have to do this and don't eat from this tree, and now you have to do this and don't do that, and if you do this I'm going to reward you, and if you don't do this I'm going to not reward you, and you're going to have faith in me, however I'm going to also give you free will, and if you choose the other way then I'm going to punish you. I mean, just all that just seemed asinine to me. And even as a little kid I was like, I don't understand. And I remember talking to religious people in my life up to the point where they just said, you know, kid, shut up, you know. And then, you know, Old Testament stuff, I hope that guy doesn't exist. I hope that there isn't such an angry, jealous, vicious creature waiting to torment me in hell because I, you know, accept homosexuality or whatever.
Well, I hope to convince you that you're misreading that.
Yeah. But we'll see. I'm reading the Bible now, and I'm reading, and I'm also going through the atheist texts and that are out there. But I just have a hard time with. I mean, it's amazing that you found religion and that it really did save you, fix you from a path of destruction and probably early death, more than likely an early death. But I also am a very happy person. I've never been drunk. I've never been high. I don't smoke. I don't, I've never done drugs. I have a loving family and loving my wife, and every day is, I've been through some crap and figured it out. Now I'm super happy without the benefit of a supernatural being.
I think one of my kind of one of the ways that I look at religion, the religious world, I think there's a substantive difference between people who experience, I'm just going to say, God from experience God. That's the right way to say it. There's a difference between those people and someone who has a religious cultural narrative. I think that metaphysic experiences where God touches your life produces different outcomes than scriptural texts, whatever they are. And there are a lot of reasons to be a part of a religion. Tribalism, nationalism, money, power, control. There's a lot of reasons. Comfort? Sure. There's a lot of psychological and physical reasons to be a part of a religion. And I think it's a different thing to have an experience with God. And I think that the religion that isn't connected to the divine is dangerous and is hostile to humans.
Well, Muslims are connected to the divine, and they think that they're the ones. They think they're saved and that they know God, and that you're wrong.
Yeah, they do.
And we're talking about people who could be your brother, who you could love, and then you guys could end up killing each other.
Not me.
You're not gonna.
I do love them.
You're not gonna fight them, but I mean, they may. I'm just saying, the amount of effort that it would require to get me to fly an airplane into a building is gonna be a lot. And if Christ came to you, if Jesus Christ came to you and said, I need you to do this, I imagine you would do it. I mean, I hope you would do it if you believe that God is God and that he said, kill your son, Abraham, and he was going to do it.
Well, I'd say this. I think it's probably easier to get you to fly a plane into a building than me. And here's why. I think that I could imagine a scenario where I appeal to your reason and I say, Felix, if you don't fly this plane into this building, I'm going to drop a nuclear bomb on 7 million people, including your family. And you, as a rational atheist, would say, trolley car experiment, this is a sensible thing. I'm going to fly this plane into this building because I want to save 1 million people. That would be the right thing to do from your worldview and perspective. If someone told me that,
I don't agree with that. I'll tell you why, but go ahead.
I would say, no, I can't. My God won't let me.
Let me ask you this. What if Jesus came down and stood in front of you and said, I'm Jesus? Would you believe him? What does it take?
Maybe. But what it would take is that it would have to conform with what I already know about him. And what I already know about him is that he told me to love even my enemies and to be at peace with men, and that I'm here for the good of my fellow
Yeah,
man.
but we talked about last time, God said you got to kill every man, woman, and child in this village.
Yeah, we need to unpack more of what's happening in the Old
We'll
Testament.
talk about. We're going to do a lot of stuff about the Old Testament. I know, but really quickly about the bridge thing, about the train tracks. So I read more about that experiment, and interestingly, here's the deal. There's a train.
Yeah, the trolley car.
It's trolley car is going down. It's going to hit 15 people. Okay, and you've got a lever, and you can divert the train onto a track where it will hit one person. Okay, most people will divert the train because
one is less than 15.
However, if
it's your son,
if there's a person in the hospital who has a bad heart, and there's another person who has a bad lung, and another person who has a bad stomach, another person that needs eyes, and then a perfectly healthy man walks in the hospital. You're not going to kill that perfectly healthy man and harvest all of his organs to save the 5 people.
Right.
Even though it's the same thing. 1 man dies, 5 people live.
Right.
Why would we not do that? Because that man had nothing to do with anything. At least the guy on the train tracks was on the train tracks. So, I mean, wrong place, wrong time. You can rationalize it, right? But also, let's say that a train's going down a track under a bridge. There's 5 people there, and there's a big fat dude on the bridge, and you can push that fat dude off, and it'll stop the train and kill him. Most people would not do that because that is me committing a murder. That man was not going to die. He's sitting there doing nothing. The dude on the tracks is in a dangerous place. The dude on the bridge is not.
Right.
So, to say, oh, Felix, just kill 3,000 people to save 1 million, I don't know that I could do that. I honestly don't. I think, obviously I'm going to use every ounce of my energy to figure out how I can thwart the other thing. But actively killing somebody, that's a very difficult thing.
Let's leave the theoretical.
I'm not sure that there's anything that you could do to get me to kill someone. I mean, I keep thinking, oh, somebody's raping my family and murdering and cutting their heads. I don't know. I don't know. But my gut is I would not be able to kill someone else.
I appreciate that. And I think the same thing. I don't think there are any circumstances that could provoke me to kill someone.
Well, I hope that if God came down and said, I need you to do this, that you're going to say yes, since that's your entire life view. But everything.
But my life view is predicated on the teachings that I've already received from God, and it would be incompatible for him to be able to reverse that.
So are you in disagreement with the Old Testament? I mean, do you believe the Old Testament was the Word of God?
Yeah, I do.
And you believe in that God? Oof, you got some conflict
Lucy,
going on
you
there.
got some explaining to do.
You got some problems. I mean, this is fast. I mean, we don't have to solve this tonight.
Right.
We got a million things, but we're
right at about an hour.
This is what I'm talking about, man. But that you're right and they're wrong bothers me.
Okay, I'll accept that. But did I get a little bit of traction on the dragon in the garage? Did I make a little bit of a case for the dragon?
I do like what you said about the dragon as being a personal thing, like that the dragon has changed me personally. In that way, which is how I feel about religion in general. It's like, dude, if it saved your life,
right.
Great. I like this Matthew better than the skinhead version.
Sure.
Right?
Me too.
So that's great.
Right.
And if you have to believe in a fairy tale for that to happen, then more power to you. And if you can if you're convincing others of this fairy tale makes their life better, then I suppose that's okay too. It's just that it's so powerful, this fairy tale. It's so powerful that pretty soon those people are bombing abortion clinics or they're killing
What do you think
homosexuals.
about the fact that medical practitioners can't manipulate people with placebo?
What do you mean can't?
It's unethical for medical practitioners to give people placebos when they know they're placebos.
I don't.
So if I go to the
What's the
doctor and I
question?
say I'm sick,
Mm-hmm.
by the numbers, if you don't know what to do with me, you
Right.
could give me sugar
Sure,
pills,
and say, hey.
and I'm more likely to get better than not.
Right.
But that's been deemed unethical by the medical practice because you're prescribing placebo. What you're saying is that I'm like a spiritual placebist. I'm advocating spiritual placebos because they might make people better. Is that I guess it's unethical if you know it's a placebo.
Yeah, and I mean, we are as our mind makes the world, right?
Mhm.
And I don't believe in God, and that's what you really do. I mean, it is what you believe, and that's inside your mind. That's your mind, and that is true. It's actually true to you. It's not. There is no truth and false. It's a person who is a schizophrenic and sees somebody stabbing a goat right in front of you, and they're screaming and squealing, and there's a devil, and he's eating it. I can say that doesn't exist, and the schizophrenic would even know it doesn't. Right. I know that doesn't exist, but I see it. I'm hearing it. I can't get it out of my head. There's, that is real. It's real because your mind is telling you it's real.
It's the only way we have to perceive reality.
Right. So, but I also understand you as a very intelligent, very logical, very critical thinking person, and so I love to hear you try to squirm your way out of how is yours real and Scientology isn't, But it's a fascinating conversation, and I love it, and I love learning more about you. But the dragon actually helping you in a personal way is a wonderful thing. So.
Yeah.
Good on you, Dragon.
Well, that's a good place to end.
All right, I love you.
Love you too.